The thing with the desk is it doesn't allow us to move, and our brains need movement to be stimulated so that we can be productive, creative, and perform. And there's nothing else that was really solving the full range of motion that I was after. I then got a group of friends who are engineers, civil engineers, and experienced designers, and we got in a room and I explained the problem, created the boundaries of the design. I said, we need to build something.
Bart de Vries, thanks very much for being on a Kiwi original.
Thank you for having me here, Ryan. Wonderful.
You are welcome. This is episode 3. I'm really interested to hear your story with a company called Limber that helps you sit, stand, and kneel in a more optimum way to make sure that you're not only more productive, but you look after the one and only body that we all have.
Yeah.
So maybe we start off with kind of a broad question on that, which is what's wrong with the desks we all use in offices around New Zealand?
Oh, it's a beauty. Thanks for having me. It's awesome to be here, and I love Christine's work. I've seen a bit of hers. The thing with the desk is it doesn't allow us to move. That's fundamentally the problem. Our bodies need movement to function. All of our bodily systems require movement to process everything that's going on, and our brains need movement to be stimulated so that we can be productive, creative, and perform, as well as stay healthy over time. So fundamentally, this is broken purely because it doesn't move like us. If you think about our environments currently in the places we work or even at home, a lot of it is we are restricted by the things in our environment. Be it the couches, the beds, the desks, they're all in fixed positions, and our body needs and craves that movement, and we don't get that in these environments currently, which is challenging us, causing all sorts of health impacts, as well as reduced performance and productivity and creativity in the short term. So that was the kind of fundamental problem that I saw coming from my physio background after I got a sore back myself, and the headaches and all of the things from getting into the business world and working in an office will do to you, and decided to solve it.
So let's go to that point. When did you see that there was something wrong with these desks? Because a lot of us will get aches and pains while sitting at a desk doing work. But there's not a lot you can do about it. What made you decide you could?
Must have been well over 5-6 years ago now. I decided to shift away from working as a physiotherapist, get off the tools and look at ways to improve people's health and well-being for long term. More of take a preventative approach to healthcare versus the bottom of the cliff stuff that I was doing. And so I shifted out of physio, wanted to learn more about business, and saw business and as the kind of the intersection with solutions that could spread any new idea really, really quickly in our day and age. And so I started learning more about business, started working off my laptop more, started sitting at a desk more, started being more static. I come from a background where I was a professional hockey player, working with professional athletes, and suddenly I was in this incredibly fixed environment, and I started getting tight hips, sore back, sore shoulders, headaches, and I had copious amounts of friends that would come up to me asking me for shoulder rubs and solutions to their shoulder problems and their neck problems. And I looked around and I was just like, wow, this is a massive problem. And now I'm experiencing it, and the irony was incredibly real. And I looked around online and tried to find a solution, because I was like, this is a fundamental issue in my day that I need to solve, let alone my friends. Couldn't find anything that was up to date with the latest research that I knew, and the solutions that were out there were showing an incredible benefit, but the actual utility and uptake of the solutions was really low. Even people who had electric sit-stand desks, for instance, were only moving, 20% of those people were only moving them up and down in a week. They kind of get them for the first 3 weeks, 4 weeks, they move it up and down, the novelty wears off, they go back to sitting, or they keep it at standing and they don't move. So the benefit and the impact was real, but the design and the solution that were out there on the market, I could see improvements to. So gathered a team of friends and we got cracking.
So your approach here was to look for a product solution, not to go back to your physio days and think, actually, this is a set of exercises I can do, or
No. There's just so much. There's only so much you can do when you're a physio seeing someone for anywhere from 15 to 30 minutes, a couple times a week, maybe if you're lucky. You're trying to give people exercises to correct issues that are being created through 8 to 18 hours of their day, depending on their lifestyle and what they're up to. A small change in our environment that people is going to shift how their body is moving or what kind of postures they're in day to day, or over even long periods of the day, for instance sitting, is going to change someone's body shape, function, creativity, productivity that much more than anything I can do as a physio with an exercise in a session.
So you're saying for the people that are listening and watching right now that maybe have a sore lower back or a sore left shoulder or feeling tight behind the neck right now, that anything you do in terms of exercise or going to physio or getting a massage is short term, but that's not going to solve the long term problem because we're fixed in these sitting desks.
It'll certainly help. Like if you've got pain from anything like that was as a physio, it's your role is to try and understand the source of that pain and create a treatment response that'll remove that pain, and then try to set them up for the future. But that future piece is so hard to do because as soon as someone is out of pain, there's a loss of motivation to continue doing the exercises. From that point, it's a matter of trying to look at people's environment that they're living in every day and the behaviors that they're doing every day that are starting to contribute to that long-term risk of recurrence of pain. So and with be it necks or lower backs, these are such common issues, and chronic pain is such a 1 in 4 people in New Zealand live with chronic pain.
Wow.
So these are such big issues in our life that we are so used to just trucking through and ignoring, and it's so common that it seems normal. Being in pain shouldn't be normal. Being in pain should be an outlier, and we should be living these full, energetic, happy lives that are pain-free.
Okay, so this is interesting. So you've identified a problem. You've found other people who have the same problem, but more than that, you're actually qualified in solving this pain problem for many people. And as a physio, that's a very high level of experience and intellect you have to have with a human body.
Yeah.
Now then you move into solving this more permanently with an alternative to the seated desk.
Yeah.
How did you go about that process to try and solve the environment rather than the human body in the environment?
I think the first part is recognizing what shifts behavior change more than anything. Education is a big component of it, but it's very kind of hard slug to educate people to change their behavior. Our physical environments and the environments that we live in are the most assured way of changing our behavior. And the easy way to think about that is with like a chocolate bar. If you have a chocolate bar in the cupboard, it's easy to grab a chocolate bar. You'll eat the chocolate bar. If there's no chocolate bar in the cupboard, you didn't buy it at the shop, you can't eat the chocolate bar. It's a small shift in your environment that cuts out a behavior. Same here with the desking situation, is that we don't actually have, or there wasn't a solution that allowed full range of motion, full movement, full dynamics of your body while you wanted to work. We rely on these fixed screens for our livelihoods and our jobs now with computers. They're fixed, they're not going to go anywhere. So what is the solution? What ways can we create an environment that allows your body to go through full range of motion and get what it needs throughout a day?
I think that's important to highlight, because what you're saying there is that the physiotherapist world says you need this full range of motion, you need to practice doing this, yet the realities are when you go back to the office or to home, it's very fixed, and so the two aren't going to mix. Then looking at that fixed scenario, what was your path of discovery to work out how you could shift that?
So we looked at, when I first had that insight around the desks being fixed and then there's nothing else that was really solving the full range of motion that I was after, it was also looking at the research around the use cases of these current desks that we have and what kind of uptake they were getting. I then got a group of friends who are engineers, civil engineers, industrial designers and experienced designers, and we got in a room and I explained the problem, created the boundaries of the design. I said we need to build something. And so that was probably about 4.5 years ago. We built our first miniature cardboard one version in that meeting, with some sellotape as a counterweight, and chopsticks as the as the frame, and we started to kind of get momentum week on week with that. And so we went through an iterative design process where we made these prototypes. First one was miniature cardboard, second one was a full-size cardboard. We got people testing them straight away. We went into Xero and Trade Me, started looking at all of their workstations, their teams, chatting with their facility staff, trying to get different perspectives on the desks and how they were being used in a tech environment. And then alongside those companies, and Dev Academy is another one in Wellington here, which is a web development school. It's a boot camp, so we had students and then the likes of Xero and Trade Me. We had them all testing our versions that were our next one after the cardboard full size was a bang up from Bunnings that we did for $150, and we got them testing it straight away. And we just iterated and used all of that feedback and all of that user experience to really build out the ultimate experience for what people wanted and needed in a modern desking solution.
Using those skills of your own physiotherapy skills plus the civil engineer, that group of people, what were you able to uncover that other desk manufacturers, whether it's seated, standing, or the ones that move up and down, what did you solve that they hadn't managed to, or what problem did you uncover that maybe they hadn't perceived?
I think the understanding why people weren't actually using them, so why only 20% of people were kind of changing height on these desks in a day, why is it only increasing the amount of movement or standing time by like 40 minutes in a day? So trying to understand what that behavior shift or the challenges or barriers to just pushing a button on those electric ones and standing up was. And the barriers that we found were it just takes too long. When you're in a flow state trying to get work done, pushing a button, waiting even 10 at the best, maybe 20 seconds more broadly, is an interruption, and it's a cognitive moment where you're going to be a healthier human, and you're committing to it for the next 10 seconds, and you're interrupting whatever process you're in, versus something that can move quickly and swiftly as fast as you can move, that doesn't interrupt your thought, but is basically a reaction based off discomfort. So as soon as you're uncomfortable, you can quickly and easily shift your position without having to change where your mind is. It becomes like riding a bike, is the way that I describe it to people. It's like a little bit of a learning curve to get your head around, but as soon as you've got it, you can do algebra on a bike. You can do anything, and you're cycling along. It's the same with a good, well-designed desk. It should be able to move quickly, and that's what we've got to. We went through all sorts of mechanisms as well, looking at electronics, hydraulics, all of this kind of high-tech stuff, and we ended up with a rope and pulley and a counterweight, because it was the only piece of tech known to man that allowed us to get the full range of motion and at the speeds that we wanted. So there's like a nice irony in the type of technology that we're using and who we're selling it to.
That makes sense, that in order to get something to move fast, you're trying to keep that brain of your employee in zone, because the companies you mentioned, Xero, Trade Me, I've got a friend who runs a tech developer hub. He's got 60-70 employees. He says it takes his staff on average 30 to 45 minutes to get into flow, and if they're snapped out of that flow, it might take them another 30 to 45 to get back to the state where they can solve that line of code or debug or test or do anything inside the code, not necessarily the business analyst role as much, but certainly in the coding base. So it makes sense that the standing desk, if it's 10 to 20 seconds, is interrupting that cognitive process because it's a different cognitive load. So is that the only market that you've tried and tested with, or is that just where you saw early success?
That was the original market that we were looking at heading into. It had the greatest need. I think from my perspective, there's a lot of technology and a lot of energy being funneled into tech at the moment. It's kind of building out the future of what we know in our lives. And so from my physio background, I want to make sure that the people who are building the future have the healthiest brains and the healthiest bodies, so that they can solve problems, more complex problems, more elegantly, put kind of simply. But we have been, we've got a huge home market as well now, so we ship directly to home. People will self-assemble them. Awesome fun videos with some chocolate and tea that they can from the Wellington chocolate factory down the road, that they can have while they're putting this together, and those are some of the people who we're getting the most feedback from as well, who just absolutely love it. They just love being able to put it together once it's assembled and move it for the first time. It's like a big wow moment, and then they are some of our biggest champions.
So let's talk about that, the actual feedback that's coming back from home users, from business users, whether they're coders or managers, or where a whole team or a whole floor has got this, or just one pod. What's some of the cultural barriers that you've unblocked, or the feedback that you've got that's helped you and the Limber team go, actually, we might be onto something here? Yeah,
well, I think the let's talk about Xero, I think, in that case, because they're probably our best customer in regards to how they've supported us from this design phase and through to purchasing. They've probably got over 50 or 60 of these in their offices at the moment, and they helped us design the petal shape as well, which has come from feedback from their facilities teams and their other teams, which is space is so limited in offices these days, and it's so expensive. And the other thing with a digital workspace is that we don't need as much desk space as we used to, because we don't have the paper that we used to. So we created a petal-shaped desk which kind of tapers inwards, and allows for 6 to occur in a hexagon, which is the most efficient shape in nature. So it means that we reduce the amount of desk space in an office by more than half, if they've got an 1800 wide like this one, which gives you so much space back. We have, on one of the floors in Xero, they have about 120 people, and if they shifted to a full floor that we mapped out and drew out, they could end up with 180 people in that space and have more empty space, open space in the office. So a feeling of more open space, yet more people in it, purely because there's less space taken up by desks.
Isn't that interesting? Because that then flows through to some of the thinking around, particularly with tech companies, but it should be for any company where you're doing knowledge work, is that create spaces for serendipity, for ideas, creativity, for people to bump into each other. With a structured floor of desks, it's very hard to achieve that. Like, we've got pods here, and each pod is a specialist group of people, but the only way you're going to bump into people is between where the coffee is, where the elevators are, and the bathrooms and reception and the meeting rooms, not necessarily when you're in flow. And a pod like that, the hexagons, would solve that for a particular type of working.
Totally. And it's also for instance, that Xero example, they're never going to go to putting 180 people on the floor. It's too many people. But what that means is that they can peel that back to 130, and they would have heaps of space on hand that they can start to create breakout zones, whiteboard zones, all sorts of areas that then can be used for that serendipity, but also can have different environments for different types of people's needs. So you could have a quieter library environment for people that need stillness and quietness to be able to think clearly for some types of tasks, versus busy kind of cafe zones where people who love that kind of stimulus will want to be hanging out and working in. It allows for that even on a smaller scale. We worked with Mevo, who's an electric car share company here in Wellington. They had a small office of about 50 square meters, tiny little space. They had 9 people in it, and we were able to remodel that to have 13 people in it, and again, more open space. So we had increased the amount of efficiency of that space by 37%, which is like the number of people, and then also increased the experience of that space, so the open space, by something like 7%, I think. And it's
a smart way to work, and I think what's interesting about it is that you're taking a problem where, with that real estate space, making it better use, but also it's just a one-off capital expenditure. And you may save on having to, if you're in growth phase, which I imagine Mevo is, the last thing you want to do when you're at that very crucial stage of just the first 10, 20, 30 employees, you don't want to split across offices. and moving can be disruptive because you've got to move at pace. You don't want to lose anything. So this can be a way of bridging that gap between going from a 10 employee space to maybe the 40 employee one.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And I think that for instance, with Mevo, we mapped their whole office out in virtual reality for them, and we took in a VR kit for their staff to view their future office before it had been even implemented, and so they were able to provide some feedback on that space and pick where they wanted to sit and all this kind of stuff before it was even a thing. So it created the hype and gave them that experience of what the space was going to be like, so that when they came into that space it wasn't a big surprise either. It was the behavior change and the acclimatization of that space had already begun, probably months earlier.
That is genius.
Yeah.
Because we all know how tied to our personal space we get, and when it's outside the home, we don't necessarily control it. So that desk area, if you're preparing the team to do that, you can unblock barriers or come up with the solutions prior to. Do you do the installation as well?
Yeah, so at the moment we're still doing the installation, and it's a lot of fun because at the moment I'm still probably doing most of that as well, because I want to meet as many of our customers as possible and get to know them and understand how and why they're choosing our desks, and then working through with them around how they're using them and what kind of benefits they're getting out of them.
Sorry to interrupt. This won't take long. Subscribe to the show and you'll never miss another one of these amazing episodes. Right, back to the show.
Yeah.
So let's move on to the New Zealand made element and talk about what's the making process. When you went from, did the prototypes, you had a couple of cardboard versions, you're probably having a few jokes in amongst you of what's going to work and not work.
Yeah.
You get some early beta testers to try out these cardboard desks, and then shift over to something that costs a little bit more and takes more time to make, but I'm assuming not on a production scale yet. What are you starting to play around with in terms of who's going to manufacture it, what are the materials, what needs importing versus what are you going to make here? Let's talk about that part, because I think that can then go into why we approved you as a New Zealand made license holder business.
Yeah, so we throughout the design phase we had obviously the functional design elements we wanted to have out of movement, but then we had a whole bunch of sustainability stuff that was alongside that. So making sure that we're making things to last for long periods, making sure that we're making things easy to fix should they ever break, and making sure that we're trying to make as locally as possible to reduce the carbon emissions and impacts that would have from the desks. As well as being able to embed in local community and have a direct feedback loop into our local communities is really important to us. So we started designing, the first wooden desk we made was out of pine from Bunnings. That was one of our prototypes, and some local steel. And then we shifted into plywood, which is where we started looking across New Zealand, trying to understand what plywood was out there, because we needed the rigidity of a plywood and of a hardwood as well. We talked to every plywood and wood manufacturer in New Zealand, but unfortunately we didn't have anything that was up to the specs that we needed it, because most of our wood is used for construction. It's not for furniture. We don't have as much value add plywood in New Zealand.
You would have thought we'd do pretty well on the timber side of things here.
You'd think so, but it's mainly for a construction market, and so a lot of that heads offshore unfinished or without much value added into its raw materials. So there's a growing movement for kind of value add in New Zealand around our wood supplies, but it's just not quite there yet. So we had to start looking offshore, and we were looking for what sustainable options were out there, and we ended up using a Finnish birch plywood, which is grown on the northern border of Finland and Russia, and so it's really slow growing birch wood. Takes about 30 years to grow, and because of that it's extremely hard, and it's that hard density and stiffness that we need for the mechanisms on our desk. And that's a small in a global context, but pretty large in New Zealand context, family forestry up there that's been around for 60 plus years, and have had the most strictest of sustainability standards that they've grown alongside for years and years and years. So we were pretty happy with that, and we've brought that in. We bring that into New Zealand through a distributor in ply format, and then we have our local workshop here in Wellington, where we turn all of that into the desks. So we cut all of the parts out, and out of this flat ply sheet, this desk slowly emerges.
And so if you were to get an order tomorrow for a corporate lot of desks,
yeah,
what's your capacity now? What's an easy completion versus what would require you to take the next step in scaling production?
It's
capacity?
exciting because we're right in the midst of this step right now. So we can produce about 1,000 desks a year currently on our current setup. So that's kind of enough for most kind of office sizes, with a lead time anywhere from 3 to 4 weeks for some kind of small orders, maybe around 10, let's say, to probably a little bit longer for anything up around 50 to 100. So, but we're in the midst of purchasing new machinery and setting up our own workshop, which will be a bigger workshop, which will allow for a lot larger capacity, and it will allow us to service much larger clients, which we're very excited about.
Sounds fantastic. Now, Bart, this is your first serious business. We were talking about your not so serious business before. What's it been like for you going through this process, actually running your own company? For those listening that may be an employee or maybe on a similar start of their journey, what are some of the things that have given you the confidence? What are some of the concerns you've had? How do you manage your own well-being? What are all the things that come with startup founder entrepreneur life that we don't hear that much about in mainstream media that the audience should be aware of?
I think for me, like the biggest things that I've found beneficial, supportive over the years that I've done it now, is just making sure I've got a strong social network, and people who know what I'm up to, know the risks and the stresses that are involved in my life at different points that I can be open with, and that are there to support kind of no matter what. So I've got that in my partner and a group of friends, and I'm very lucky that my family is supportive as well in regards to just checking in on me, making sure that things are okay. I'd say that that's probably the strongest foundation. And then for my own personal well-being, I went through a real kind of drop off in my own personal physical activity after I finished playing hockey professionally, and I didn't do any physical exercise because I played it all my life, and all my physical exercise was bound up in team sports and going to the gym for like specific purpose of improving something. All that purpose was gone, and here I was realizing that I didn't actually enjoy working out and I didn't actually enjoy exercise for the sake of exercise. I thought it was completely pointless, and so it took me a couple of, probably 3 years to go through that, and I went into the worst health of my life. I started to get high blood pressure, I put on weight, I had all of the classics things, and so I had to pull myself out of that by getting into the gym, booking a couple of sessions. Group fitness classes are kind of the thing that I enjoy. It's kind of a little bit mimics my hockey background. I can still have some fun. I can turn up for 30 minutes, 40 minutes, don't have to think about it, and I can leave a sweaty mess, exhausted. So that was a big part of just getting myself back on track. It was setting in those rhythms that I just make sure I turned up to. And then making sure the other part, I think, as well, as I wasn't drinking enough water. I was running around town, working, doing all these things, meeting to meeting, and everything's so unpredictable that there's not as much rhythm as there was in my life. So small little things like drinking enough water became a behaviour that I didn't do as much of. And so I started drinking a lot more water, and hey presto, I've got more energy throughout the afternoon, and my body and mind is functioning a lot clearer. So I think it's often not the most complex things that have the biggest impact, and picking 2 classes a week to go to, drinking enough water, making sure I've got good friends around me that are supportive and are aware of the different stages of a business, or the challenges or the risks that I'm taking on, and are there to support is crucial.
I think that's a great message for anyone listening and watching there that is running a business or is part of the steering of the business. It's very easy for us to get so focused in the operational side, we forget about looking after the body side. That's all encompassing. If we don't have that, there's nothing else that really works, or it works at a suboptimal level.
Oh man, I was making some horrific decisions, and I look back and I see the time wasted and I see the productivity missed, and purely because I wasn't in a good physical state. As soon as I put in those 2 exercise routines sessions a week, had my sweat and burnt off all of the kind of the latent and increasing levels of stress hormones in my body, it creates this whole new capacity to think clearly, to be a lot calmer, to take a step back and breathe when you've got a complex challenge that's just turned up out of nowhere. Yeah.
Now, you've been with the New Zealand Made group with a license to use the Kiwi trademark for not that long, actually, since May last year. So you're one of the 161 or so we had in 2019. It was a record year for us. So
cool.
Thanks for making the application. This is more of a selfish question here because you are relatively new.
Yeah.
What's been the experience for you going through the application process and being part of New Zealand Made since that time through to now for a business or someone who's thinking, should I apply? Should I add the Kiwi trademark to what I make?
Yeah, I think in terms of the process, it was so simple and it was really quick. It was a lot less effort than I was expecting, which is really nice when you're starting a business to find things that take less time than you've put aside for them. And I think the thing that got me with the Kiwi NZ Made logo mark as well is that Kiwi is just so iconic across New Zealand, and that stamp is so iconic across New Zealand. And so it was an easy one for me to be, not only to kind of differentiate myself in the market, but also for us to stand by something we're kind of proud of, and to have that mark as alongside on our products as kind of a signifier of some of that pride. And so in regards to kind of seeing what's happened, or seeing the community in a little bit more detail as well, which is nice, is seeing how many people are involved in this community, and the passion that's involved in it as well, has been like a highlight for us this last 6 months.
Now, one of the last questions, we were talking before we started recording, is that you've got some plans into the US with a university there. What are some of the future vectors, or where you're going to take this product, and what have they seen of interest that could take the Limber desk to the next stage? Yeah,
this is real exciting. So we are embarking on some research with Berkeley University in California, UC Berkeley. They're out of San Fran, and they are looking at the impacts of having a dynamic desk, so something that moves from standing to sitting to the floor, allowing for full range of motion and allowing that quickly, compared to sitting in a chair or even perching as a new option. So there's these stools that allow you to perch at a hip angle of 120 degrees, which is good for a number of things, but both are still static options. So what happens when we compare our current kind of static norm to something that is really dynamic and allows for more movement? And so they're looking at physiological outputs, so they'll be doing heart rate variability, they'll be looking at emotional and psychological status, as well as productivity and reaction and speed typing data and all sorts of random stuff like that. But it's exciting because this is the first study of its kind. There's no other desk in the world that allows the range of motion that we allow. There's no other desk that they can test floor sitting postures on. More than half the world use the floor and the ground as their primary environments for work. In the Western world, we've kind of missed that a little bit, and so it's looking at what are the impacts for our overall health, well-being and performance in a working context, which is amazing.
And if the research comes out as you're hoping or expecting, what then happens?
It's going to be huge, I think. So there'll be two parts where we're looking at shifting into Australia this year as well. We'll be looking at the States as an option as well, probably early next year. and looking to scale and grow and build out probably more of the office, of the Limber office environment. So it's not purely a desk, it's kind of looking at Limber as a whole office solution. So how do we improve movement, how do we improve human function throughout an office through its design, looking at some of the most fundamental things like chairs and desks.
I'd agree with that the opportunity, the bigger opportunity here is the service side of it, to sell the office solution, which the desk is a component of.
Totally.
Because each worker has different needs, and the whole office will have a solution that's required, and it's not just particularly desk focused. I think what's come across in this interview is what you understand with the cultural norms, with how people adopt solutions, and how you went about it in a very different way from trying to solve a problem as a physio would temporarily, or trying to solve the problem without taking into account the brain side of it. So that's going to change whether you're standing or sitting, but that jump or that shift that takes 10 to 20 seconds of the desk interrupts your cognitive flow, and that can have productivity losses for a company. So that's what I think, a couple of things I've learned from this interview. What else haven't I covered, Bart, that you want to talk about before we wrap this up and go and have a bit of a play with the desk?
I think that's a good summary. I think that the speed of movement is one thing, and then through the learnings that we had with working with facility staff, understanding the space and size component of desks was another thing. So that reduced desk footprint area was a huge learning for us that we weren't expecting, and then I think just making it beautiful was like one of the final steps that we had to go through, because we had a bit of pride. We didn't want to just have a purely functional item that was useful but ugly. We wanted to make something that would stand out in the office and people would be proud of themselves as we were to make it.
Well, you've certainly done that. Looking in the corner there, I commend you on just how it looks, and I'm looking forward to just having another go at a couple of the seating arrangements we didn't try before, of the seated and the kneeling arrangement. Well, thank you very much for being on a Kiwi Original. I take my hat off to you for what you've achieved thus far. It's not easy bringing a new product into the world, particularly in the furniture space. It is crowded. There is tons of solutions, so it's not easy to get that traction. I think seeing the work you have done, particularly through your social media posts and how you're approaching that, is unique, and I'd call it thumb stopping, and that's what got me to see your business in the first place. So well done, keep it up, and look forward to maybe having a chat with you in a year or so once that research from Berkeley comes back.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Ryan, and it's awesome to be part of the NZ Made community. It's wonderful to be part of. Cheers.
You're welcome. This has been a Kiwi Original brought to you by the New Zealand Made team. Thanks for watching. The New Zealand Made trademark is used by over 1,200 businesses in New Zealand. The New Zealand Made team licenses that trademark. Check if you're eligible at bynz.org.nz. If you feel that someone should see this, share it with them now. Otherwise, subscribe to youtube.com/bynzmade, and we'll see you on the next episode.